Okay. Gonna get started. Hopefully this will be the second to last. See how far we can get. If we can do 20 pages today, we should be able to do another 20 pages next week. Malleus Maleficarum. So we're reading... Don't even know. So we'll just go to this. Question 12. Of the same matter, declaring more particularly how the question of personal enmity is to be investigated, the seventh action. Take notice that only mortal enemies are debarred from giving evidence, as was shown in the fifth question, but the judge may consider that to come to a decision about such enmity by the means we have just explained is rather dubious and unsatisfactory, and the accused or her procurator may not be willing to accept a decision arrived at on such grounds as to whether the enmity is mortal or not. Therefore, the judge must use other means to decide concerning the alleged enmity, so that he may not punish the innocent, but exact full justice from the guilty. And though these means may savor of cunning and even guile, yet the judge may employ them for the good of the faith and the state. For even St. Paul says, "But being crafty, I caught you by guile." And these means are especially to be employed in the case of a prisoner who has not been publicly defamed, and is not suspected because of the evidence of any fact. And the judge may also employ them against prisoners who have alleged enmity on the part of the deponents, and wish to know all the names of the witnesses. The first method is this. The accused or her advocate is given a copy of the process with the names of the deponents or informers, but not in the order in which they deposed, but in such a way that the name of the witness who comes first in the copy is sixth or seventh in the schedule, and he who comes second is last or last but one. In this way, the accused will be deceived as to which witness deposed this or that, and then she will either say that they are all her enemies or not. And if she says that they all are, she will be more easily detected in a lie when the cause of the enmity is investigated by the judge. And if she names only certain ones, still the cause of enmity will be more easily investigated. The second method is similar, when the advocate is given a copy of the process and separately a list of the names of the deponents. But there are added other matters perpetrated elsewhere by witches, but not set down in writing by the witnesses or deponents. And so the accused will not be able to say definitely that this one or that one is her mortal enemy, because she does not know what they have deposed against her. The third method was touched upon in the fifth question above. For when the accused is questioned at the end of her second examination, and before she has demanded to be defended or an advocate has been allotted to her, let her be asked whether she thinks that she has any mortal enemies who, setting aside all fear of God, would falsely accuse her of the crime of heresy and witchcraft. And then, perhaps, without thinking, and not having seen the depositions of the witnesses, she will answer that she does not think that she has any such enemies, or if she says, "I think I have," and names any of the witnesses who have laid information, and the reason for that enmity is known, then the judge will be able to investigate it with more certainty afterwards, when the accused has been given separate copies of the process and of the names of the witnesses in the manner we have explained. The fourth method is this. At the end of her second examination and confession, as we showed in the sixth question, before she is granted any means of defense, let her be questioned as to the witnesses who have laid the more serious charges against her in this manner. "Do you know so-and-so?" naming one of the witnesses, and then she will answer either yes or no. If she says no, she will not be able, after she has been given means of defense and an advocate, to plead that he is a mortal enemy, since she has said on oath that she does not know him. But if she says yes, let her be asked whether she knows or has heard that he or she has acted in any way contrary to the Christian faith in the manner of a witch. Then if she says yes, for he did such and such a thing, let her be asked whether he is her friend or enemy, and she will immediately answer that he is her friend, because the testimony of such is not of very great account, and consequently she will not be able to afterwards to plead an oath through her advocate that he is her enemy, for she has already said that he is her friend. But if she answers that she knows nothing about him, let her again be asked whether he is her friend or enemy, and she will at once answer that he is her friend, for it would be futile to allege enmity on the part of someone of whom she knows nothing. Therefore she says, I am his friend, but if I knew anything about him, I would not fail to reveal it. Therefore she will not be able afterwards to plead that he is her enemy, or perhaps she will from the very beginning allege reasons for mortal enmity, and in that case some credence must be placed in the plea of the advocate. A fifth method is to give the advocate or the accused a copy of the process, with the names of the informers suppressed, and then the accused will guess, and very often rightly, who has deposed such and such against her, and then, if she says, so and so is my mortal enemy, and I am willing to prove it by witnesses, then the judge must consider whether the person named is the same person named in the schedule, and since she has said that she is willing to prove it by witnesses, he will examine those witnesses and inquire into the causes of the enmity, having secretly called into consultation learned and aged men of known prudence. And if he finds sufficient reasons for mortal enmity, he shall reject that evidence and dismiss the prisoner, unless there are other grave charges against her, sworn to by other witnesses. And this fifth method is commonly used, and it is found in practice that witches quickly guess from the copy of the process who has laid information against them, and because in such cases mortal enmity is rarely found unless it arises from the wicked deeds of the witch, therefore the judge can easily come to a decision by the above means. Also, it is to be noted that often the informers desire to confront the witch personally, and to charge her to her face with the bewitchment which has befallen them. There is still one more method whereunto the judge may finally have recourse, when perhaps the other methods, and especially the first four, seem to some to savor too much of cunning and deceit. Accordingly, to satisfy and content the scrupulous, and that no fault may be found with the judge, let him take care, after he has found by the above methods that there is no mortal enmity between the accused and the deponent, but wishes to remove all grounds for complaint by settling the question finally in consultation with his other assessors, to act as follows. Let him give to the accused or her advocate a copy of the process with the names of the deponents or informers suppressed, and since her defense is that she has mortal enemies, and perhaps she has alleged various reasons for the enmity, whether or not the facts are in agreement with her statements, let the judge call into consultation learned men of every faculty, if such can be had, or at least some honest and reputable persons, for this is the purport of that statute we have so often quoted, and let him cause the whole process to be read through to them, from end to end, by the notary or scribe, and let the names of the witnesses be made known to them, but under an oath of secrecy, and he shall first inquire whether or not they are willing to be bound by such an oath, for if not, the names must by no means be declared to them. Then let him tell how he has inquired in such and such a manner into the alleged enmity, and has not been able to find any testimony of fact. But he shall add that, if they please, one of two courses shall be pursued. Either they shall decide then and there in consultation whether the evidence of any of the witnesses shall be rejected on the grounds of mortal personal enmity, or let them choose 3 or 4 or 5 persons who have most knowledge in that town or village of any friendship or enmity between the accused and the informer, who are not present at the consultation, and let them be informed of the names only of the accused and the witnesses, but not of the information which has been deposed, and let the whole question be left to their judgment. If they follow the former of these courses, they cannot very well reject any witness, since the judge has already used his own methods of investigation. But by the second course, he protects himself perfectly and clears himself of all ugly suspicions, and he ought to observe this last method when the accused has been taken in a foreign town or country. These methods will suffice for examining the question of personal enmity. Okay. Question 13. Of the points to be observed by the judge before the formal examination in the place of detention and torture, this is the 8th action. The next action of the judge is quite clear, for common justice demands that a witch should not be condemned to death unless she is convicted by her own confession. But here we are considering the case of one who is judged to be taken in manifest heresy for one of the other two reasons set down in the first question, namely, direct or indirect evidence of the fact, or the legitimate production of witnesses, and, in the case she is to be exposed to questions and torture, to extort a confession of her crimes. And to make the matter clear, we will quote a case which occurred at Spires and came to the knowledge of many. A certain honest man was bargaining with a woman, and would not come to terms with her about the price of some article, so she angrily called after him, "You will soon wish you had agreed," for witches generally use this manner of speaking, or something like it, when they wish to bewitch a person by looking at him. Then he, not unreasonably, being angry with her, looked over his shoulder to see with what intention she had uttered those words, and behold, he was suddenly bewitched, so that his mouth was stretched sideways as far as his ears, in a horrible deformity, and he could not draw it back, but remained so deformed for a long time. We put this case that this was submitted to by the judge as direct evidence of the fact, and it is asked whether the woman is to be considered as manifestly taken in the heresy of witchcraft. This should be answered from the words of St. Bernard, which we have quoted above. For there are 3 ways in which a person may be judged to be so taken, and they not so closely conjoined, as though it were necessary for all 3 to agree in one conclusion. But each one by itself, namely, the evidence of the fact or the legitimate production of witnesses, or her own confession, is sufficient to prove a witch to be manifestly taken in that heresy. But indirect evidence of the fact is different from direct evidence, yet though it is not so conclusive, it is still taken from the words and deeds of witches, as was shown in the 7th question, and it is judged from the witchcraft which is not so immediate in its effect, but follows after some lapse of time from the utterance of the threatening words. Wherefore may we conclude that this is the case with such witches who have been accused and have not made good their defense, or have failed to defend themselves because this privilege was not granted them, and it was not granted because they did not ask for it. But what we are to consider now is what action the judge should take, and how he should proceed to question the accused, with a view to extorting the truth from her so that sentence of death may finally be passed upon her. And here, because of the great trouble caused by the stubborn silence of witches, there are several points which the judge must notice, and these are dealt with under their several heads. And the first is that he must not be too quick to subject the witch to examination, but must pay attention to certain signs which will follow. And he must not be too quick for this reason, unless God, through a holy angel, compels the devil to withhold his help from the witch. She will be so insensible to the pains of torture that she will sooner be torn limb from limb than confess any of the truth. But the torture is not to be neglected for this reason, for they are not equally endowed with this power, and also the devil sometimes of his own will permits them to confess their crimes without being compelled by a holy angel. And for the understanding of this, the reader is referred to that which is written in the second part of this work concerning the homage which they offer to the devil. For there are some who obtain from the devil a respite of 6 or 8 or 10 years before they have to offer him their homage, that is, devote themselves to him body and soul, whereas others, when they first profess their abjuration of the faith, at the same time offer their homage. And the reason why the devil allows that stipulated interval of time is that during that time he may find out whether the witch has denied the faith with her lips only but not in her heart, and would therefore offer him her homage in the same way. For the devil cannot know the inner thoughts of the heart except conjecturally from outward indications, as we showed in the first part of this work, where we dealt with the question whether devils can turn the minds of men to hatred or love. And many have been found who, driven by some necessity or poverty, have been induced by other witches, in the hope of ultimate forgiveness and confession, to become either total or partial apostates from the faith. And it is such whom the devil deserts without any compulsion by a holy angel, and therefore they readily confess their crimes, whereas others, who have from their hearts bound themselves to the devil, are protected by his power and preserve a stubborn silence. And this provides a clear answer to the question how it comes about that some witches readily confess and others will by no means do so. For in the case of the former, when the devil is not compelled by God, he still deserts them of his own will, in order that by temporal unhappiness and a horrible death he may lead to despair those over whose hearts he could never obtain the mastery. For it is evident from their sacramental confessions that they have never voluntarily obeyed the devil, but have been compelled by him to work witchcraft. And some also are distinguished by the fact that, after they have admitted their crimes, they try to commit suicide by strangling or hanging themselves. And they are induced to do this by the enemy, lest they should obtain pardon from God through sacramental confession. This chiefly happens in the case of those who have not been willing agents of the devil, although it may also happen in the case of willing agents after they have confessed their crimes, but then it is because the devil has been compelled to desert the witch. In conclusion, we may say that it is difficult, or more difficult, to compel a witch to tell the truth, as it is to exorcise a person possessed of the devil. Therefore, the judge ought not to be too willing or ready to proceed to such examination unless, as has been said, the death penalty is involved. And in this case, he must exercise great care, as we shall show, and first we shall speak of the method of sentencing a witch to such torture. Question 14. Of the method of sentencing the accused to be questioned, and how she must be questioned on the first day, and whether she may be promised her life, the ninth action. Secondly, the judge must take care to frame his sentence in the following manner. We, the judge and assessors, having attended to and considered the details of the process enacted by us against you, of such a place in such a diocese, and having diligently examined the whole matter, find that you are equivocal in your admissions, as for example, when you say that you use such threats with no intention of doing an injury, but nevertheless there are various proofs which are sufficient to warrant for exposing you to the question and torture. Wherefore, that the truth may be known from your own mouth, and that henceforth you may not offend the ears of the judges, we declare, judge and sentence, that on the present day at such an hour you be placed under the question and torture. The sentence was given, etc. Alternatively, as has been said, the judge may not be willing to deliver the accused up to be questioned, but may punish her with imprisonment with the following object in view. Let him summon her friends and put it to the that she may escape the death penalty, although she will be punished in another way if she confesses the truth, and urge them to try to persuade her to do so. For very often meditation and the misery of imprisonment and the repeated advice of honest men dispose the accused to discover the truth. And we have found that witches have been so strengthened by this sort of advice that as a sign of their rebellion they have spat on the ground as if it were in the devil's face, saying, "Depart, cursed devil, I shall do what is just," and afterwards they have confessed their crimes. But if after keeping the accused in a state of suspense, and continually postponing the day of examination, and frequently using verbal persuasions, the judge should truly believe that the accused is denying the truth, let them question her lightly without shedding blood, knowing that such questioning is fallacious and often, as has been said, ineffective. And it should be begun in this way. While the officers are preparing for the questioning, let the accused be stripped, or if she is a woman, let her first be led to the penal cells, and there stripped by honest women of good reputation. And the reason for this is that they should search for any instrument of witchcraft sewn into her clothes. For they often make such instruments at the instruction of devils out of the limbs of unbaptized children, the purpose being that those children should be deprived of the beatific vision. And when such instruments have been disposed of, the judge shall use his own persuasions and those of other honest men zealous for the faith, to induce her to confess the truth voluntarily. And if she will not, let him order the officers to bind her with cords and apply her to some engine of torture, and then let them obey at once, but not joyfully, rather appearing to be disturbed by their duty. Then let her be released again at someone's earnest request, and taken on one side, and let her again be persuaded, and in persuading her, let her be told that she can escape the death penalty. Here it is asked whether, in the case of a prisoner legally convicted by her general bad reputation, by witnesses and by evidence of the fact, so that the only thing lacking is a confession of the crime for her own mouth, the judge can lawfully promise her her life, whereas if she were to confess the crime, she would suffer the extreme penalty. Here it is asked whether, in the case of a prisoner legally convicted by her general bad reputation, by witnesses, and by the evidence of fact, we answer that different people have various opinions on this question. For some hold that if the accused is of a notoriously bad reputation and gravely suspected on unequivocal evidence of the crime, and if she is herself a great source of danger, as being the mistress of other witches, then she may be promised her life on the following conditions: that she be sentenced to imprisonment for life on bread and water, provided that she supply evidence which will lead to the conviction of other witches. And she is not to be told, when she is promised her life, that she is to be imprisoned in this way, but should be led to suppose that some other penance, such as exile, will be imposed on her as punishment. And without doubt, notorious witches, especially such as use witches' medicines and cure the bewitched by superstitious means, should be kept in this way, both that they may help the bewitched, and that they may betray other witches. But such a betrayal by them must not be considered of itself sufficient ground for a conviction, since the devil is a liar, unless it is also substantiated by the evidence of the fact and by the witnesses. Others think that, after she has been consigned to prison in this way, the promise to spare her life should be kept for a time, but that after a certain period she should be burned. A third opinion is that the judge may safely promise the accused her life, but in such a way that he should afterwards disclaim the duty of passing sentence on her, deputing another judge in his place. There seems to be some advantage in pursuing the first of these courses on account of the benefit which may accrue from it to those who are bewitched. Yet it is not lawful to use witchcraft to cure witchcraft, although, as was shown in the first and introductory question into this third part, the general opinion in that is that it is lawful to use vain and superstitious means to remove a spell. But use and experience in the variety of such cases will be of more value to judges than any art or textbook. Therefore, this is a matter which should be left to the judges, but it has certainly been very often found by experience that many would confess the truth if they were not held back by the fear of death. But if neither threats nor such promises will induce her to confess the truth, then the officers must proceed with the sentence, and she must be examined not in any new or exquisite manner, but in the usual way, lightly or heavily, according as the nature of her crimes demands. And while she is being questioned about each several point, let her be often and frequently exposed to torture, beginning with the more gentle of them. For the judge should not be too hasty to proceed to the graver kind, and while this is being done, let the notary write all down, how she is tortured, and what questions are asked, and how she answers. And note that if she confesses under torture, she should then be taken to another place and questioned anew, so that she does not confess only under the stress of torture. The next step of the judge should be that, if after being fittingly tortured she refuses to confess the truth, he should have other engines of torture brought before her, and tell her that she will have to endure these if she does not confess. If then she is not induced by terror to confess, the torture must be continued on the second or third day, but not repeated at that present time, unless there should be some fresh indication of its probable success. Let the sentence be pronounced in her presence in the following manner. We, the aforesaid judge, as above, assign to you such a day for the continuation of your questioning, that the truth may be heard from your own mouth, and the notary shall write it all down in the process. And during the interval before that assigned time, the judge himself or other honest men shall do all in their power to persuade her to confess the truth in the manner we have said, giving her, if it seems expedient to them, a promise that her life will be spared. The judge should also take care that during that interval there should always be guards with her, so that she is never left alone, for fear lest the devil will cause her to kill herself. But the devil himself knows better than anyone can set down in writing whether he will desert her of his own will or be compelled to do so by God. Question 15. Of the continuing of the torture, and of the devices and signs by which the judge can recognize a witch, and how he ought to protect himself from their spells. Also, how they are to be shaved in parts where they used to conceal the devil's masks and tokens, together with the due setting forth of various means of overcoming the obstinacy in keeping silence and refusal to confess. And it is the 10th action. The judge should act as follows in the continuation of the torture. First, he should bear in mind that, just as the same medicine is not applicable to all the members, but there are various and distinct salves for each several member, so not all heretics or those accused of heresy are to be subjected to the same method of questioning, examination, and torture as to the charges laid against them. But various and different means are to be employed according to their various natures and persons. Now a surgeon cuts off rotten limbs, and mangy sheep are isolated from the healthy. But a prudent judge will not consider it safe to bind himself down to one invariable rule in his method of dealing with a prisoner who is endowed with a witch's power of taciturnity, and whose silence he is unable to overcome. For if the sons of darkness were to become accustomed to one general rule, they would provide means of evading it as a well-known snare set for their destruction. Therefore, a prudent and zealous judge should seize his opportunity and choose his method of conducting his examination according to the answers or depositions of the witnesses, or as his own previous experience or native wit indicates to him, using the following precautions. If he wishes to find out whether she is endowed with a witch's power of preserving silence, let him take note whether she is able to shed tears when standing in his presence, or when being tortured. For we are taught both by the words of worthy men of old and by our own experience that this is a most certain sign, and it has been found that even if she be urged and exhorted by solemn conjurations to shed tears, if she be a witch, she will not be able to weep, although she will assume a tearful aspect and smear her cheeks and eyes with spittle to make it appear that she is weeping, wherefore she must be closely watched by attendants. In passing sentence, the judge or priest may use some such method as the following in conjuring her to true tears, if she be innocent, or in restraining false tears. Let him place his hand on the head of the accused and say, I conjure you by the bitter tears shed on the cross by our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, for the salvation of the world, and by the burning tears poured in the evening hour over his wounds by the most glorious Virgin Mary, his mother, and by all the tears which have been shed here in this world by the saints and elect of God, from whose eyes he has now wiped away all tears, that if you be innocent, you do now shed tears, but if you be guilty, that you shall by no means do so. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. And it is found by experience that the more they are conjured, the less are they able to weep, however hard they may try to do so, or smear their cheeks with spittle. Nevertheless, it is possible that afterwards, in the absence of the judge, and not at the time or in the place of torture, they may be able to weep in the presence of their gaolers. And as for the reason for a witch's inability to weep, it can be said that the grace of tears is one of the chief gifts allowed to the penitent. For St. Bernard tells us that the tears of the humble can penetrate to heaven and conquer the unconquerable. Therefore, there can be no doubt that they are displeasing to the devil, and that he uses all his endeavor to restrain them, and to prevent a witch from finally attaining to penitence. Excuse me. But it may be objected that it might suit with the devil's cunning, with God's permission, to allow even a witch to weep, since tearful grieving, weaving, and deceiving are said to be proper to women. We may answer that in this case, since the judgments of God are a mystery, if there is no other way of convicting the accused by legitimate witnesses or the evidence of the fact, and if she is not under a strong or grave suspicion, she is to be discharged. But because she rests under a slight suspicion by reason of her reputation, to which the witnesses have testified, she must be required to abjure the heresy of witchcraft, as we shall show when we deal with the second method of pronouncing sentence. A second precaution is to be observed, not only at this point but during the whole process, by the judge and all his assessors, namely, that they must not allow themselves to be touched physically by the witch, especially in any contract of their bare arms or hands, but they must always carry about them some salt consecrated on Palm Sunday and some blessed herbs, for these can be enclosed together in blessed wax and worn round the neck, as we showed in the second part, when we discussed the remedies against illnesses and diseases caused by witchcraft, and that these have a wonderful protective virtue, and is known not only from the testimony of witches, but from the use and practice of the Church, which exercises and blesses such objects for this very purpose, as is shown in the ceremony of exorcism, when it is said, for the banishing of all the power of the devil, etc. But let it not be thought that physical contact of the joints or limbs is the only thing to be guarded against, for sometimes, with God's permission, they are able, with the help of the devil, to bewitch the judge by the mere sound of the words which they utter, especially at the time when they are exposed to torture. And we know from experience that some witches, when detained in prison, have importunately begged their gaolers to grant them this one thing, that they should be allowed to look at the judge before he looks at them, and by so getting the first sight of the judge, they have been able to alter the minds of the judge or his assessors, that they have lost all their anger against them, and have not presumed to molest them in any way, but have allowed them to go free. He who knows and has experienced it gives this true testimony, and would that they were not able to effect such things. Let judges not despise such precautions and protections, for by holding them in little account after such warning, they run the risk of eternal damnation. For our Saviour said, "If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have sinned. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Therefore, let the judges protect themselves in the above manner, according to the provisions of the Church." And if it can conveniently be done, the witch should be led backward into the presence of the judge and his assessors, and not only at the present point, but in all that has preceded or shall follow it. Let him cross himself and approach her manfully, and with God's help the power of that old serpent will be broken. And no one need think that it is superstitious to lead her in backwards, for, as we have often said, the canonists allow even more than this to be done, for the protections against witchcraft, always and always say that it is lawful to oppose vanity with vanity. The third precaution to be observed in this 10th action is that the hair should be shaved from every part of her body. The reason for this is the same as that for stripping her of her clothes, which we have already mentioned. For in order to preserve their power of silence, they are in the habit of hiding some superstitious object in their clothes, or in their hair, or even in the most secret parts of their bodies, which must not be named. But it may be objected that the devil might, without the use of such charms, so harden the heart of a witch that she is unable to confess her crimes, just as it is often found in the case of other criminals, no matter how great the tortures to which they are exposed, or how much they are convicted by the evidence of the facts and of witnesses. We answer that it is true that the devil can effect such taciturnity without the use of such charms, but he prefers to use them for the perdition of souls and the greater offense to the divine majesty of God. This can be made clear from the example of a certain witch in the town of Hagenau, which we have mentioned in the second part of this work. She used to obtain this gift of silence in the following manner. She killed a newly firstborn male child who had not been baptized, and having roasted it in an oven together with other matters which it is not expedient to mention, ground it to powder and ashes, and if any witch or criminal carried about him some of this substance, he would in no way be able to confess his crimes. Here it is clear that 100,000 children so employed could not of their own virtue endow a person with such a power of keeping silence, but any intelligent person can understand that such means are used by the devil for the perdition of souls and to offend the divine majesty. Again, it may be objected that very often criminals who are not witches exhibit the same power of keeping silence. In answer to this, it must be said that this power of taciturnity can proceed from three causes. First, from a natural hardness of heart, for some are soft-hearted or even feeble-minded, so that at the slightest torture they admit everything, even some things which are not true, whereas others are so hard that however much they are tortured, the truth is not to be had from them, and this is especially the case with those who have been tortured before, even if their arms are suddenly stretched or twisted. Secondly, it may proceed from some instrument of witchcraft carried about the person, as has been said, either in the clothes or in the hairs of the body. And thirdly, even if the prisoner has no such object secreted about her person, they are sometimes endowed with this power by other witches, however far they may be removed from them. For a certain witch at Isbrug used to boast that if she had no more than a thread from the garment of any prisoner, she could so work that however much that prisoner were tortured, even to death, she would be unable to confess anything. So the answer to this objection is clear. But what is to be said of a case that happened in the diocese of Ratisbon? Certain heretics were convicted by their own confession, not only as impenitent, but as open advocates of that perfidy. And when they were condemned to death, it happened that they remained unharmed in the fire. At length, their sentence was altered to death by drowning, but this was no more effective. All were astonished, and some even began to say that their heresy must be true, and the bishop, in great anxiety for his flock, ordered a 3 days' fast. When this had been devoutly fulfilled, it came to the knowledge of someone that those heretics had a magic charm sewed between the skin and the flesh under one arm, and when this was found and removed, they were delivered to the flames and immediately burned. Some say that a certain necromancer learned this secret during a consultation with the devil and betrayed it, but however it became known, it is probably that the devil, who is always scheming for the subversion of faith, was in some way compelled by divine power to reveal the matter. From this it may be seen what a judge ought to do when such a case happens to him, namely, that he should rely upon the protection of God, and by the prayers and fasting of devout persons, drive away this sort of devil's work from witches. In those cases where they cannot be made to confess under torture, even after their clothes have been changed and all their hair has been shaved off and abraded. Now in the parts of Germany such shavings shaving, especially of the secret parts, is not generally considered delicate, and therefore we inquisitors do not use it, but we cause the hair of their head to be cut off, and placing a morsel of blessed wax in a cup of holy water, and invoking the most holy Trinity, we give it them to drink 3 times on a fasting stomach. And by the grace of God, we have by this means caused many to break their silence. But in other countries, the inquisitors order the witch to be shaved all over her body. And the Inquisitor of Como has informed us that last year, that is, in 1485, he ordered 41 witches to be burned, after they had been shaved all over, and this was in the district and county of Burbia, commonly called Wormserbad, in the territory of the Archduke of Austria, towards Milan. But it may be asked whether in a time of need, when all other means of breaking a witch's silence have failed, it would be lawful to ask the advice in this matter of sorceresses who are able to cure those who are bewitched. We answer that, whatever may have been done in the matter of Ratisbon, it is our earnest admonition in the Lord that no one, no matter how great may be the need, should consult with sorceresses on behalf of the state, and this because of the great offense which is thereby caused to the divine majesty, when there are so many other means open to us, which we may use either in their own proper form or in some equivalent form, so that the truth will be had from their own mouths, and they can be consigned to the flames, or failing this, God will in the meantime provide some other death for the witch. For there remain to us the following remedies against this power of silence. First, let a man do all that lies in his own power by the exercise of his qualities, persisting often with the methods we have already mentioned, and especially on certain days, as will be shown in the following question. See 2 Corinthians 9, that ye may abound in all good works. Secondly, if this should fail, let him consult with other persons, for perhaps they may think of some means which has not occurred to him, since there are various methods of counteracting witchcraft. Thirdly, if these 2 fail, let him have recourse to devout persons, as it is said in Ecclesiasticus 37, Be continually with a godly man, whom thou knowest to keep the commandments of the Lord. Also let him invoke the patron saints of the country. But if all these fail, let the judge and all the people at once put their trust in God, with prayers and fasting, that the witchcraft may be removed by reason of their piety. For so Josaphat prayed in 2 Paralipomenon 20, when we know not what we should do, we have this one refuge, that we should turn our eyes to thee, and without doubt God will not fail us in our need. To this effect also St. Augustine speaks, 26, question 7, non absolubitus, whosoever observes any divinations or auguries, or attends to or consents to such as observe them, or gives credit to such by following after their works, or goes into their houses, or introduces them into his own house, or asks questions of them, let him know that he has perverted the Christian faith and his baptism, and is a pagan, apostate, and enemy of God, unless he is corrected by ecclesiastical penances and is reconciled with God. Therefore let the judge not fail always to use the lawful remedies, as we have said, together with these following final precautions. Question 16. Of the fit time and of the method of the second examination, and it is the 11th action concerning the final precautions to be observed by the judge. There are 1 or 2 points to be noted with regard to what we have just written. First, that witches should be questioned on the more holy days and during the solemnization of the Mass, and that the people should be exhorted to pray for divine help, not in any specific manner, but that they should invoke the prayers of the saints against all the plagues of the devil. Secondly, as we have said before, the judge should wear round his neck consecrated salt and other matters, with the 7 words which Christ uttered on the cross, written in a schedule, and all bound together. And he should, if he conveniently can, wear these made into the length of Christ's stature against his naked body, and bind other holy things about him. For it is shown by experience that witches are greatly troubled by these things, and can hardly refrain from confessing the truth. The relics of the saints, too, are of a special virtue. Hey Mav, how's it going? Having taken these precautions, and after giving her holy water to drink, let him again begin to question her all the time, exhorting her as before. And while she is raised from the ground, if she is being tortured in this way, let the judge read or cause to be read to her the depositions of the witnesses, with their names, saying, "See, you are convicted by the witnesses." Also, if the witnesses are willing to confront her face to face, the judge shall ask her if she will confess if the witnesses are brought before her. And if she consents, let the witnesses be brought in and stand before her, so that she may be constrained or shamed in confessing some of her crimes. Finally, if he sees that she will not admit her crimes, he shall ask her whether to prove her innocence. She is ready to undergo the ordeal by red-hot iron, and they all desire this, knowing that the devil will prevent them from being hurt. Therefore, a true witch is exposed in this manner. The judge shall ask her how she can be so rash as to run so great a risk, and all shall be written down, but it will be shown later that they are never to be allowed to undergo this ordeal by red-hot iron. Let the judge also, not that when witches are questioned on a Friday, while the people are gathered together at Holy Mass to wait our Savior, they very often confess. But we must proceed to the extreme case, when after every expedient has been tried, the witch still maintains silence. The judge shall then loose her, and, using the precautions which follow, shall take her from the place of punishment to another place under a strong guard. But let him take particular care not to release her on any sort of security, for when that is done, they never confess the truth, but always become worse. But in the first place, let him cause her to be well treated in the matter of food and drink, and meanwhile let honest persons who are under no suspicion enter to her and talk often with her on indifferent subjects, and finally advise her in confidence to confess the truth, promising that the judge will be merciful to her, and that they will intercede for her. And finally, let the judge come in and promise that he will be merciful, with the mental reservation that he means he will be merciful to himself or the state, for whatever is done for the safety of the state is merciful. But if he promises her her life, as we showed in question 14, that he can do in 3 ways, let it all be written down by the notary in what words and with what intention mercy was promised. And if the accused begs for mercy in this way, and discovers her crime, let her be promised in a vague and general way that she will receive even more than she has petitioned for, so that she may speak with the greater confidence. As a second precaution in this case, when she refuses altogether to reveal the truth, the judge should, as we have said before, examine her friends and associates without her knowledge, and if these have deposed anything which might lead to her conviction, this must be diligently investigated. Also, if any instruments or unguents or boxes have been found in her house, they should be shown to her, and she should be asked for what purpose they have been used. A third precaution can be taken when she still persists in her obstinacy, after her associates have been examined and borne witness against her, and not for her. If she has no friends, let some other trustworthy man who is known to be congenial to the accused, and to some extent a patron of hers, enter to the witch one evening and engage her in a protracted conversation. And then, if he is not an accomplice, let him pretend that it is too late for him to return, and stay in the prison with her, and continue talking during the night. And if he is an accomplice, let them eat and drink together, and talk to each other about the things they have done. Then let it be arranged that spies should stand outside in a convenient place, and listen to them, and take note of their words, and if necessary, let have a scribe with them. Let them have a scribe with them. As a fourth precaution, if she then begins to tell the truth, let the judge on no account postpone hearing her confession, even in the middle of the night, by proceed with it to the best of his ability. And if it is in the daytime, let him not care if he delays his luncheon or dinner, but persist until she has told the truth, at least in the main, for it is generally found that after postponements and interruptions, they return to their vomit and will not reveal the truth, which they began to confess, having thought worse of it. And let the judge take note that, after she has confessed the injuries done to men and animals, he shall ask her for how many years she has had an incubus devil, and how long it is since she abjured the faith. For they never confess to these matters, unless they have first confessed to these other deeds. Therefore, they must be asked concerning these last of all. As a fifth precaution, when all the above have failed, let her, if possible, be led to some castle, and after she has been kept there under custody for some days, let the castellan pretend that he is going on a long journey, and then let some of his household, or even some honest women, visit her and promise that they will set her entirely at liberty if she will teach them how to conduct certain practices. And let the judge take note that by this means they have very often confessed and been convicted. Quite lately, a witch was detained in the castle of Königsheim, near the town of Schlettstadt, in the diocese of Strasbourg, and could not be induced by any tortures or questions to confess her crimes. But at last the castellan used the method we have just described. Although he was himself present in the castle, the witch thought he was away, and 3 of his household came in to her, and promised they would set her free if she would teach them how to do certain things. At first she refused, saying that they were trying to entrap her. But at last she asked what it was they wanted to know, and one asked how to raise a hailstorm, and another asked about carnal matters. When at length she agreed to show him how to raise a hailstorm, and a bowl of water had been brought in, the witch told him to stir the water with his finger, and herself uttered words, and suddenly the place which he had named, a wood near the castle, was visited by such a tempest and storm of hail as had not been seen for many years. It yet remains to show how the judge is to proceed in pronouncing sentence in a case where all these means have failed, or what is further to be done even when she has confessed her crimes, that the whole process may be brought to an end, and we shall complete this last part of this work with a consideration of these matters. The third head, which is the last part of this work, how the process is to be concluded by the pronouncement of a definite and just sentence. Having by the grace of God examined the proper means of arriving at a knowledge of the heresy of witchcraft, and having shown how the process on behalf of the faith should be initiated and proceeded with, it remains to discuss how that process is to be brought to a fitting termination with an appropriate sentence. Here it is to be noted that this heresy, as was shown in the beginning of this last part, is not to be confused with other simple heresies, since it is obvious that it is not a pure and single crime, but partly ecclesiastical and partly civil. Therefore, in dealing with the methods of passing sentence, we must first consider a certain kind of sentence to which witches are in the habit of appealing, and which the secular judge can act on his own account independently of the ordinary. Secondly, we shall consider those in which he cannot act without the ordinary. And so, thirdly, it will be shown how the ordinaries can discharge themselves of their duties. Question 17. Of common purgation, and especially of the trial of red-hot iron to which witches appeal. The question is now asked whether the secular judge may allow a witch to be submitted to a common purgation, concerning which see Canon 2, question 4, Consul Usti and Cap Monomachiem, in the manner in which a civil defendant is allowed by trial by ordeal, as, for example, that by red-hot iron, and it may seem that he may do so. For trial by combat is allowable in a criminal case for the protection of life, and in a civil case for the protection of property. Then wherefore not the trial by red-hot iron or boiling water? St. Thomas allows that the former is permissible in some cases, when he says in the last article of the second question 95, that a duel is lawful when it appears to be consonant with common sense. Therefore, the trial by red-hot iron should also be lawful in some cases. Also, it has been used by many princes of saintly life who have availed themselves of the advice and counsel of good men, as, for example, the sainted Emperor Henry in the case of the Virgin Cunegond, whom he had married, who was suspected of adultery. Again, a judge who is responsible for the safety of the community may lawfully allow a smaller evil that a greater may be avoided, as he allows the existence of harlots in towns in order to avoid a general confusion of lust. For St. Augustine on free will says, "Take away the harlots, and you will create a general chaos and confusion of lust." So when a person has been loaded with insults and injuries by any community, he can clear himself of any criminal or civil charge by means of a trial by ordeal. Also, since less hurt is caused by the hands of the to the hands by red-hot iron than is the loss of life in a duel, if a duel is permitted where such things are customary, much more should the trial by red-hot iron be allowed. But the contrary view is argued where it says, to question 5, Monomachium, that they who practice such and similar things appear to be tempting God. And here the doctors affirm, it must be noted that according to St. Paul, I Thessalonians 5, we must abstain, not only from evil, but from all appearance of evil. Therefore, the canon says in that chapter, not that they who use such practices tempt God, but that they appear to tempt him, so that it may be understood that, even if a man engage in such a trial with none but good intentions, yet since it has the appearance of evil, it is to be avoided. I answer that such tests or trials are unlawful for 2 reasons. First, because their purpose is to judge of hidden matters, of which it belongs only to God to judge. Secondly, because there is no divine authority for such trials, nor are they anywhere sanctioned in the writing of the Holy Fathers. And it says in the chapter Consolisti, that which is not sanctioned in the writings of the sainted fathers is to be presumed superstitious. And Pope Stephen, in the same chapter, says, "It is left to your judgment to try prisoners who are convicted by their own confession, or the proofs of the evidence, but leave that which is hidden and unknown to him, who alone knows the hearts of men." There is, nevertheless, a difference between a duel and the trial by red-hot iron or boiling water, for a duel appears to be more humanly reasonable, the combatants being of similar strength and skill, than a trial by red-hot iron, for although the purpose of both is to search out something hidden by means of a human act, yet in the case of trial by red-hot iron, a miraculous effect is looked for, whereas this is not so in the case of a duel, in which all that can happen is the death of either or both of the combatants. Therefore, the trial by red-hot iron is altogether unlawful, though a duel is not illegal to the same extent. So much has been incidentally admitted in respect of duels on account of princes and secular judges. It is to be noted that because of those words of St. Thomas which make the above distinction, Nicholas of Lyra, in his commentary on the duel or combat between David and Goliath, I Regnum 17, tried to prove that in some cases a duel is lawful, but Paul of Burgos proves that not this, but rather the opposite was the meaning of St. Thomas, and all princes and secular judges ought to pay particular attention to his proof. His first point is that a duel, like the other trial by ordeal, has as its purpose the judgment of something hidden, which ought to be left to the judgment of God, as we have said. And it cannot be said that this combat of David is an authority for dueling, For it was revealed to him by the Lord through some inner instinct that he must engage in that combat and avenge upon the Philistine the injuries done against God, as is proved by David's words, I come against thee in the name of the living God. So he was not properly speaking a duelist, but he was the executor of divine justice. His second point is that judges must especially note that in a dual power, or at least license, is given to each of the parties to kill the other. But since one of them is innocent, that power of license is given for the killing of an innocent man, and this is unlawful, as being contrary to the dictates of natural law and to the teaching of God. Therefore, a duel is altogether unlawful, not only on the part of the appellant and the respondent, but also on the part of the judge and his advisors, who are all equally to be considered homicides or parties to manslaughter. Thirdly, he points out that a duel is a single combat between two men, the purpose of which is that the justice of the case should be made clear by the victory of one party, as if by divine judgment, notwithstanding the fact that one of the parties is fighting in an unjust cause, and in this way God is tempted. Therefore, it is unlawful on the part of both the appellant and the respondent. But considering the fact that the judges have other means of arriving at an equitable and just termination of the dispute, when they do not use such means, but advise or even permit a duel when they could forbid it, they are consenting to the death of an innocent person. But since it is unlikely that Nicholas the commentator was unaware or ignorant of the above reasoning, it is concluded that when he says that in some cases a duel can be fought without mortal sin, he is speaking on the part of the judges or advisors, namely, in a case when such a trial is undertaken, not on their responsibility or advice, but purely on that of the appellant and respondent themselves. But since it is not our purpose to linger over and debate such considerations, but to return to the question of witches, it is clear that if this sort of trial is forbidden in the case of other criminal causes, such as theft or robbery, still more must it be forbidden in the case of witches, who, it is agreed, obtain all their power from the devil, whether it be for causing or curing an injury, for removing or preventing an effect of witchcraft. And it is not wonderful witches are able to undergo this trial by ordeal unscathed, with the help of devils, for we learn from naturalists that if the hands be anointed with the juice of a certain herb, they are protected from burning. Now the devil has an exact knowledge of the virtues of such herbs. Therefore, although he can cause the hand of the accused to be protected from red-hot iron by invisibly interposing some other substance, yet he can procure the same effect by the use of natural objects. Hence, even less that other criminals ought witches to be allowed this trial by ordeal, because their intimate familiarity with the devil, and from the very fact of their appealing to this trial, they are to be held as suspected witches. An incident illustrative of our argument occurred hardly 3 years ago in the Diocese of Constance. For in the territory of the Counts of Fürstenberg and the Black Forest, there was a notorious witch who had been the subject of much public complaint. At last, as the result of a general demand, she was seized by the Count and accused of various evil works of witchcraft. When she was being tortured and questioned, wishing to escape from their hands, she appealed to the trial by red-hot iron, and the Count, being young and inexperienced, allowed it. And she then carried the red-hot iron not only for the stipulated 3 paces, but for 6, and offered to carry it even farther. Then, although they ought to have taken this as a manifest proof that she was a witch, since one of the saints dared to tempt the help of God in this manner, she was released from her chains and lives to the present time, not without grave scandal to the faith in those parts. Question 18. Of the manner of pronouncing a sentence which is final and definitive. In proceeding to treat of those cases in which the secular judge by himself can arrive at a judgment and pronounce a sentence without the cooperation of the diocesan and ordinaries, we necessarily presuppose that not only is it consistent with the protection of the faith and of justice that we inquisitors should be relieved of the duty of passing sentence in these cases, but in the same sincerity of spirit we endeavor to relieve the dioceses also from that duty, not in any desire to detract from their authority and jurisdiction, for if they should elect to exercise their authority in such matters, it would follow that we inquisitors must also concur in it. It must be remembered also that this crime of witches is not purely ecclesiastic. Therefore, the temporal potentates and lords are not debarred from trying and judging it. At the same time, we shall show that in some cases they must not arrive at a definitive judgment without the authorization of the dioceses. But first we must consider the sentence itself, secondly, the nature of its pronouncement, and thirdly, in how many ways it is to be pronounced. With regard to the first of these questions, St. Augustine says, "We must not pronounce sentence against any person unless he has been proved guilty, or is confessed." Now there are three kinds of sentence: interlocutory, definitive, and preceptive. These are explained as follows by St. Raymond. An interlocutory sentence is one which is given not on the main issue of the case, but on some other side issues which emerge during the hearing of a case, such as a decision whether or not a witness is to be disallowed, or whether some digression is to be admitted, and such matters as that. Or it may perhaps be called interlocutory, because it is delivered simply by word of mouth, without the formality of putting it into writing. A definitive sentence is one which pronounces a final decision as to the main issue of the case. A preceptive sentence is one which is pronounced by a lower authority on the instruction of a higher, but we shall be concerned with the first two of these, and especially with the definitive sentence. Now it is laid down by law that a definitive sentence, which has been arrived at without a due observance of the proper legal procedure, is trying a case and is null and void in law, and the legal conduct of a case consists in two things. One concerns the basis of the judgment, for there must be a due provision for the hearing of arguments both for the prosecution and the defense, and a sentence arrived at without such a hearing cannot stand. The other is not concerned with the basis of the judgment, but provides that the sentence must not be conditional. For example, a claim for possession should not be decided conditionally upon some subsequent claim of property, but where there is no question of such an objection, the sentence shall stand. But in the case we are considering, which is a process on behalf of the faith against a charge of heresy, though the charge is a mixed one, the procedure is straightforward and summary. That is to say, the judge need not require or demand that the case should be contested, but he must allow opportunity for the necessary proofs, and issue his citation, and exact the protestation of the oath concerning calumny, etc. Therefore, there has lately been a new law made as to the method of procedure in such cases. To proceed to our second consideration, namely of the nature of the pronouncement of the sentence, it must be noted that it should be pronounced by the judge and no one else, otherwise it is not valid. Also, the judge must be sitting in a public and honorable place, and he must pronounce it in the daytime and not in the darkness. And there are other conditions to be observed. For example, the sentence must not be promulgated upon a holy day, nor yet merely delivered in writing. Yet, it is to be noted that since, as we have said, this case is conducted in a simple and summary manner, it may lawfully be conducted on holy days for the sake of convenience of the public, and the judge may cut short any digressions. Therefore, the judge may, if he pleases, act in such a manner, and even pass sentence without putting it in writing. For we are authoritatively informed that there are cases in which a sentence is valid without it being put into writing, as, for example, when such is the custom of any particular locality or court. Also, there is excellent precedent for a bishop, when he is the judge, allowing the sentence to be pronounced by some other person. Note again that although in criminal actions the execution of the sentence is not to be delayed, this rule does not hold good 4 cases, with 2 of which we are here concerned. First, when the prisoner is a pregnant woman, then the sentence shall be delayed until she has given birth. Secondly, when the prisoner has confessed to her crime, but has afterwards denied it again, that is to say, when the way which we explained in the 14th question. Now, before we proceed to our third consideration, namely, the different methods of passing sentence, which we shall proceed to treat of up to the end of this work, we must first make some remarks about the various ways in which a prisoner is rendered suspect, from which the various methods of passing sentence follow as a consequence. Question 19. Of the various degrees of overt suspicion which render the accused liable to be sentenced. Both the old and the new legislature provide an answer to the question as to in how many and what ways a person can be held suspect of heresy or any other crime, and whether they can be judged and sentenced by reason of such suspicions. For the gloss on the chapter Nos in Quimquam, which we quoted in the last question, says that there are 4 means of convicting a prisoner, either by the depositions of witnesses in court, or by the evidence of the facts, or by the reason of previous convictions against the prisoner, or because of grave suspicion. And the canonists note that suspicion is of 3 kinds, the first of which the canon says, "You shall not judge anyone because he is suspect in your own opinion." The second is probably, and this but not the first, leads to a purgation. The third is grave, and leads to a conviction. And St. Jerome understands this kind of suspicion when he says that a wife may be divorced either for fornication or for a reasonably suspected fornication. It must further be noted that the second or highly probable and circumstantial suspicion is admitted as a kind of half-proof, that is to say, it helps to substantiate other proofs. Therefore, it can also lead to a judgment, and not only to a purgation. And as for the grave suspicion, which suffices for a conviction, note that it is of 2 kinds. One is of the law and by the law, and when the law fixes and determines some point against which no proof can be admitted. For example, if a man has given a woman a promise of matrimony, and copulation has ensued, then matrimony is presumed, and no proof to the contrary is admitted. The second is of the law but not by the law, as where the law presumes but does not determine a fact. For example, if a man has lived for a long time with a woman, she is presumed to have a connection with him, but against the proofs are admitted. Applying this to our discussion of the heresy of witches and to the modern laws, we say that in law there are 3 degrees of suspicion in the matter of heresy, the first slight, the second great, and the third very great. The first is in law called a light suspicion. Of this it is said in the chapter Accusatus Deherit Lib 6, if the accused has occurred only a light and small suspicion, and if she should again fall under that suspicion, although she is to be severely punished for this, she ought not to suffer the punishment of those who have relapsed into heresy. And this suspicion is called small or light, both because it can be removed by a small and light defense, and because it arises from small and light conjectures. Therefore it is called small, because of the small proofs of it, and light, because of the light conjectures. As an example of simple heresy, if people are found to be meeting together secretly for the purpose of worship, or differing in their manner of life and behavior from the usual habits of the faithful, or if they meet together in sheds and barns, or at the more holy seasons, in the remoter fields or woods, by day or by night, or are in any way found to separate themselves and not attend Mass at the usual times or in the usual manner, or form secret friendships with suspected witches, such people incur at least a light suspicion of heresy, because it is proved that heretics often act in this manner. And of this light suspicion, the canon says, they who are by a slight argument discovered to have deviated from the teachings and path of the Catholic religion are not to be classed as heretics, nor is a sentence to be pronounced against them. Henry of Segusio agrees with this in his Summa de Presumptione, where he says, It is to be noted that although a heretic be convicted by a slight argument of that matter of which he is suspected, he is not on that account to be considered a heretic, and he proves it by the above reasoning. The second, or grave suspicion, is in law called grave or vehement, and of this the above canon, accusatus, again says, one who is accused or suspected of heresy, against whom a grave or vehement suspicion of this crime has arisen, etc. And it goes on, and there are not two kinds, but the same kind of suspicion. Giovanni de Andreas also says, vehement is the same as strong, as the archdeacon says, speaking of this canon. Also, Bernardus Papiensis and Huguccio say that vehement is the same as strong or great. St. Gregory also, in the first book of his Morals, says, a vehement wind sprang up. Therefore, we say that anyone has a vehement case when he has a strong one. So much for this. Therefore, a great suspicion is called vehement or strong. It is so called because it is dispelled only by a vehement and strong defense, and because it arises from great, vehement, and strong conjectures, arguments, and evidence. As to take an example of simple heresy, when people are found to shelter known heretics, and show favor to them, or visit and associate with them, and give gifts to them, receive them into their houses, and protect them, and such like. Such people are vehemently suspected of heresy. And similarly, in the heresy of witches, they are brought under suspicion when they share in the crimes of witches. And here are especially to be noted those men or women who cherish some inordinate love or excessive hatred, even if they do not use to work any harm against men or animals in other ways. For as we have said, those who behave in this way in any heresy are strongly to be suspected. And this is shown by the canon, where it says that there is no doubt that such persons act in this way out of some heretical sympathy. The third and greatest suspicion is in law called grave or violent. For the canon and the glosses of the Archdeacon and Giovanni de Andrea explain that the word vehement does not mean the same as the word violent, and of this suspicion the canon says, distinction 34, this presumption or suspicion is called violent, because it violently constrains and compels a judge to believe it, and cannot be cast off by any evasion, and also because it arises from violent and convincing conjectures. For example, in simple heresy, if persons are found to show a reverent love for heretics, to receive consolation or communion from them, or perpetuate any other such matter in accordance with their rites and ceremonies, such persons would fall under and be convicted of a violent suspicion of heresy and heretical beliefs. See many chapters on this subject in Book 6 of the Canon. For there is no doubt that such persons act in this way out of a belief in some heresy. It is the same as regards the heresy of witches, with those who perform and persist in performing any of the actions which pertain to the rites of witches. Now these are of various kinds. Sometimes it is only some threatening speech, such as, "You shall soon feel what will happen to you," or something similar. Sometimes it is a touch, just laying their hands curiously on a man or beast. Sometimes it is only a matter of being seen, when they show themselves by day or by night to others who are sleeping in their beds. And this they do when they wish to bewitch men or beasts. But for raising hailstorms they observe various other methods and ceremonies, and perform various ritual actions round about a river, as we have shown before, where we discussed the manner and methods of working witchcraft. When such are found and are publicly notorious, they are convicted of a violent suspicion of the heresy of witchcraft, especially when some effect of witchcraft has followed upon their actions, either immediately or after some interval. For then there is direct evidence when any instruments of witchcraft are found hidden in some place, and although when some interval of time has elapsed, the evidence of the fact is not so strong, such a person still remains under strong suspicion of witchcraft, and therefore much more of simple heresy. And if it be asked whether the devil cannot inflict injury upon men and beasts without the means of a woman being seen in a vision or by her touch, we answer that he can, when God permits it. But the permission of God is more readily granted in the case of a creature that was dedicated to God, but by denying the faith has consented to other horrible crimes, and therefore the devil more often uses such means to harm creatures. Further, we may say that although the devil can work without a witch, he yet very much prefers to work with one, for the many reasons which we showed earlier in this work. To sum up our conclusions on this matter, it is to be said that, following the above distinctions, those who are suspected of the heresy of witchcraft are separated into three categories, since some are lightly, some strongly, and some gravely suspected. And they are lightly suspected who act in such a way as to give rise to small or light suspicion against them of this heresy. And although, as has been said, a person who is found to be suspected in this way is not to be branded as a heretic, yet he must undergo a canonical purgation, or he must be caused to pronounce a solemn abjuration, as in the case of one convicted of a slight heresy. For the canon says, those who have been found to rest under a probable suspicion, that is, says Henry of Segusio, a light suspicion, unless having respect to the nature of the suspicion and the quality of their persons, they should prove their innocence by a fitting purgation. They are to be stricken with the sword of anathema as a worthy satisfaction in the sight of all men. And if they continue obstinate in their excommunication for the period of a year, they are to be utterly condemned as heretics. And note that in the purgation imposed upon them, whether or not they consent to it, and whether or not they fall in it, they are throughout to be judged as reputed heretics, on whom a canonical purgation is to be imposed. And that a person under this light suspicion can and should be caused to pronounce a solemn abjuration is shown in the chapters Accusatus, where it says, a person accused or suspected of heresy, against whom there is a strong suspicion of this crime, if he abjures the heresy before the judge and afterward commits it, then by a sort of legal fiction he shall be judged to have relapsed into heresy, although the heresy was not proved against him before his abjuration. But if the suspicion was in the first place a small or light one, although such a relapse renders the accused liable to severe punishment, yet he is not to suffer the punishment of those who relapse into heresy. But those who are strongly suspected, that is, those who have acted in such a way as to engender a great and strong suspicion, even those are not necessarily heretics, or to be condemned as such, for it is expressly stated in the canon that no one is to be condemned of so great a crime by reason of a strong suspicion. And it says, therefore, we order that, when the accused is only under suspicion, even if it be a strong one, we do not wish him to be condemned of so grave a crime, but such a one so strongly suspected must be commanded to abjure all heresy in general, and in particular that of which he is strongly suspected. But if he afterwards relapses, either into his former heresy or into any other, or if he associates with those whom he knows to be witches or heretics, or visits them, receives, consults with, forgives, or favors them, he shall not escape the punishment of backsliders, according to the chapter Accusatus. For it says there, he who has been involved in one kind of or sect of heresy, or has erred in one article of the faith or sacrament of the church, and has afterwards specifically and generally abjured his heresy, if thereafter he follows another kind or sect of heresy, or errs in another article or sacrament of the church, it is our will that he be judged a backslider. He therefore, who is known to have lapsed into heresy before his abjuration, if after abjuration he receives heretics, visits them, gives or sends them presents or gifts, or shows favor to them, etc., he is worthily and truly to be judged a backslider. For by this proof there is no doubt that he was in the first place guilty. Such is the tenor of the canon. From these words it is clear that there are 3 cases in which a person under strong suspicion of heresy shall after his abjuration be punished as a backslider. The first is when he falls back into the same heresy of which he was strongly suspected. The second is when he has abjured all heresy in general, and yet lapses into another heresy, even if he has never before been suspected or accused of that heresy. The third is when he receives and shows favor to heretics, and this last compromises and embraces many cases. But it is asked, what should be done when a person who has fallen under so strong a suspicion steadily refuses to comply with his judge's order to abjure his heresy? Is he to be at once handed over to the secular court to be punished? We answer that by no means must this be done, for the canon ad abolendum expressly speaks not of suspects, but of those who are manifestly taken in heresy, and more rigorous action is to be employed against those who are manifestly taken than against those who are only suspected. And if it is asked, how then is such a one to be proceeded against? We answer that the judge must proceed against him in accordance with the chapter Excommunicamus, and he must be excommunicated. And if he continues obstinate after a year's excommunication, he is to be condemned as a heretic. There are others, again, who are violently or gravely suspected, whose actions give rise to a violent suspicion against them, and such a one is to be considered as a heretic, and throughout he is to be treated as if he were taken in heresy, in accordance with the canon law. For these either confess their crime or not, and if they do, and wish to return to the faith and abjure their heresy, they are to be received back into penitence. But if they refuse to abjure, they are to be handed over to the secular court for punishment. But if he does not confess his crime after he has been convicted and does not consent to abjure his heresy, he is to be condemned as an impenitent heretic, for a violent suspicion is sufficient to warrant a conviction and admits no proof to the contrary. Now this discussion deals with simple heresy, where there is no direct or indirect evidence of the fact, as will be shown in the 6th method of passing sentence, where a man is to be condemned as a heretic, even though he may not actually be one. Then how much more is it applicable to the heresy of witches, where there is always, in addition, either the direct evidence of bewitched children, men or animals, or the indirect evidence of instruments of witchcraft, which have been found. And although in the case of simple heresy, those who are penitent and abjure are, as has been said, admitted to penitence and imprisonment for life, yet in this heresy, although the ecclesiastic judge may receive the prisoner into penitence, yet the civil judge can, because of her temporal injuries, that is to say, the harm she has done to men, cattle, and goods, punish her with death. Nor can the ecclesiastic judge prevent this, for even if he does not hand her over to be punished, yet he is compelled to deliver her up at the request of the civil judge. Question 20. Of the first method of pronouncing sentence. Since, therefore, the accused is either found innocent and is to be altogether absolved, or is found only to be generally defamed as a heretic, or is found a proper subject for the questions and the torture on account of her reputation, or is found to be lightly suspected of heresy, or is found to be strongly or gravely suspected of heresy, or is found to be at the same time commonly defamed and suspected of heresy, or is found to have confessed her heresy and to be penitent but probably to have relapsed, or is found to have confessed her heresy and to be impenitent but not really to have relapsed, or is found to have confessed by legitimate witnesses and otherwise legally to have been convicted of heresy, or is found to have been convicted of heresy but to have escaped or defiantly absented herself, or is found not to have done injury by witchcraft, but to have removed bewitchments unfittingly and by unlawful means, or is found to be an archer, wizard, or enchanter of weapons, with the purpose of causing death, or is found to be a witch midwife, offering infants to the devil in the manner of an enemy, or is found to make frivolous and fraudulent appeals with a view of saving her life. Therefore, if she is found to be entirely innocent, the final sentence shall be pronounced in the following manner. Here it is to be noted that the accused is found to be entirely innocent when, after the facts of the process have been diligently discussed in consultation with skilled lawyers, she cannot be convicted either by her own confession or by the evidence of the fact or by the production of legitimate witnesses, since they have disagreed upon the main issue. And when the accused has never before been suspected of or publicly defamed as regards that crime, but the case is different if she has been defamed as regards some other crime, and when there is no evidence of the fact against her, in such a case the following procedure is observed. For she is to be absolved by the bishop or judge by a sentence to the following effect. We, by the mercy of God, bishop of such a town or judge, etc., considering that you of such a place and such a diocese have been accused before us of the crime of heresy, and namely of witchcraft, and considering that this accusation was such as we could not pass over with convenient eyes, have condescended to inquire whether the aforesaid accusation can be substantiated as true, by calling witnesses, by examining you, and by using other means which are fitting according to the canonical sanctions. Wherefore, having diligently seen and examined all that has been done and said in this case, and having had the counsel of learned lawyers and theologians, and having repeatedly examined and inquired into all, sitting as judges on this tribunal, and having only God before our eyes and the truth of the case, and the holy Gospels being placed before us, that our judgment may proceed from the countenance of God, and our eyes behold equity, we proceed to our definitive sentence in this way, invoking the name of Christ, since by that which we have seen and heard, and have been produced, offered, done, and executed before us in this present case, we have not found that anything has legally been proved against you of those things of which you were accused before us. We pronounce, declare, and give it as our final sentence that no act has legally been proved to us against you, by which you can or ought to be judged a heretic or witch of heresy. Wherefore, by this present declaration, inquiry, and judgment, we freely discharge you. This sentence was given, etc. Let care be taken not to put anywhere in this sentence that the accused is innocent or immune, but that it was not legally proved against him. For if after a little time he should again be brought to trial, and it should be legally proved he can, notwithstanding the previous sentence of absolution, then be condemned. Note also that the same method of absolution may be used in the case of one who is accused of receiving, protecting, or otherwise comforting and favoring heretics, when nothing is legally proved against them. A secular judge commissioned by the bishop shall use his own manner of pronouncement. Question 21. Of the second method of pronouncing sentence, when the accused is no more than defamed. The second method of delivering judgment is to be employed when he or she who is accused, after a diligent discussion of the merits of the case, in consultation with the learned lawyers, is found to be no more than defamed as a heretic in some village, town, or province. And this is when the accused does not stand convicted either by her own confession or by the evidence of the facts, or by the legitimate production of witnesses. Nor has there been anything proved against her, except that she is the subject of common aspersion, so that no particular act of witchcraft can be proved, by which she can be brought under strong or grave suspicion, as that she has uttered threatening words, for example, "You will soon feel what will happen to you," or something to that effect, and afterwards some injury has befallen the person or cattle of the man she threatened. The following procedure, therefore, is to be employed in the case of such a one, against whom nothing has been proved except public obloquy. In this case, judgment cannot be delivered for the accused, nor can she be absolved as in the first method, but a canonical purgation must be imposed upon her. Therefore, let the bishop or his deputy, or the judge, first take note that, in a case of heresy, it is not necessary that a person should be defamed only by good and respected people, for the calumniation uttered by common and simple folk carries equal weight. And the reason for this is that the same persons who are admitted as accusers in a case of heresy are also admitted as detractors. Excuse me. Now any heretic can be accused by anybody, except his mortal enemies. Therefore, he can also be defamed by anybody. Therefore, let the bishop or judge pronounce his sentence of canonical purgation in this or some similar manner. We, by the mercy of God, bishop of such a city or judge of such a county, having diligently examined the merits of the process conducted by us against you of such a diocese, accused before us of the crime of heresy, etc., we have not found that you have confessed to or have been convicted of the aforesaid sin, or that you are even lightly suspected of it, except that we find that truly and legitimately you are publicly defamed by both good and bad in such a village, town, or diocese. And that you may be in good order among the company of the faithful, we impose upon you, as by law, a canonical purgation, assigning to you such a day of such a month, at such an hour of the day, upon which you shall appear in person before us, with so many persons of equal station with you, to purge you of your defamation, which sponsors must be men of the Catholic faith and of good life, who have known your habits and manner of living, not only recently, but in time past. And we signify that, if you shall fail in this purgation, we shall hold you convicted according to the canonical sanctions. Here it is to be considered that when a person is duly found to be publicly defamed of such a heresy, and nothing is proved against him except that defamation, a canonical purgation shall be imposed upon him. That is, he must produce some 7, 10, 20, or 30 men, according to the extent to which he has been defamed, and the size and importance of the place concerned. And these must be men of his own station and condition. For example, if he who is defamed is a religious, they must be religious. If he is secular, they must be seculars. If he be a soldier, they must be soldiers, who purge him from the crime for which he is defamed. And these sponsors must be men professing the Catholic faith and of good life, who have known his habits and life both recently and for a long time. But if he refuses this purgation, he must be excommunicated, and if he remains obstinate in that excommunication for a year, he is then to be condemned as a heretic. And if he accepts the purgation and fails in it, that is, if he cannot find sponsors the number and quality desired, he shall be considered as convicted, and is to be condemned as a heretic. And it must be remarked that, when it is said that he must purge himself by means of so many men of his own station in life, this is meant generically and not specifically. Thus, if a bishop is to be purged, it is not necessary that all his sponsors should be bishops, but abbots and other religious who are priests are admitted, and similarly in other cases. And the defamed person shall purge himself in the following manner. At the time assigned to him for his canonical purgation, he shall appear in person with his sponsors before the bishop who is his judge, in the place where he is known to be defamed, and placing his hand upon the book of the gospel set before him, he shall say as follows: I swear upon these 4 holy gospels of God that I have never held, believed, or taught, neither do I hold or believe such heresy, naming it, for which I am defamed. That is to say, he shall deny an oath whatever it is for which he is defamed. After this, all his sponsors shall place their hands on the Gospels, and each of them severally shall say, And I swear upon this holy Gospel of God that I believe him to have sworn the truth, and then he is canonically purged. It is also to be noted that a person defamed of heresy is to be purged in the place where he is known to be defamed, and if he has been defamed in many places, he must be required to profess the Catholic faith and deny the heresy in all the places in which he is known as defamed. And let not such a person hold in light esteem this canonical purgation, for it is provided by the canon law that if he afterwards falls into heresy of which he has been purged, he is to be handed over as a backslider to the secular court, but the case is somewhat different if he falls into the same heresy of which he has not before been purged. Okay, almost there. Question 22. Of the third kind of sentence to be pronounced on one who is defamed and who is to be put to the question. The third method of bringing a process on behalf of the faith to a conclusive termination is when the person accused of heresy, after a careful consideration of the merits of the person in consultation with learned lawyers, is found to be inconsistent in his statements, or is found that there are sufficient grounds to warrant his exposure to the question and torture, so that if, after he has been thus questioned, he confesses nothing, he may be considered innocent. And this is when the prisoner has not been taken in heresy, nor has he been convicted by his own confession, or by the evidence of the facts, or by the legitimate production of witnesses, and there are no indications that he is under such suspicion as to warrant his being made to abjure the heresy, but nevertheless he is inconsistent in his answers when interrogated, or there may be other sufficient reasons for exposing him to torture, and in such a case the following procedure is to be observed. And because such a judgment includes an interlocutory sentence, which must be against and not for the prisoner, the inquisitor must not divide it into two sentences, but include it all in one. And in the first place, if the accused remains firm in his denials, and can no way be induced by honest men to confess the truth, the following manner of sentence, which is in some respects definitive, shall be used. We, by the mercy of God, bishop of such a town or judge in the territory, subject to the rule of such a prince, having regard to the merits of the process conducted by us against you of such a place in such a diocese, and after careful examination, find that you are not consistent in your answers, and that there are sufficient indications besides that you ought to be exposed to the question and torture. Therefore, that the truth may be known from your own mouth, and that from henceforth you may not offend the ears of your judges with your equivocations, we declare, pronounce, and give sentence that on this present day, at such an hour, you are to be subjected to an interrogatory under torture. This sentence was given, etc. If the person to be questioned is both found to be equivocal, and at the same time there are other indications sufficient to warrant his being tortured, let both these facts be included in the sentence, as they are above. But if only one or the other of these hold good, let that one only be put in this sentence. But let the sentence be soon put into execution, or let them make it as if to execute it. Nevertheless, let not the judge be too willing to subject a person to torture, for this should only be resorted to in default of other proofs. Therefore, let him seek for other proofs, and if he cannot find them, and he thinks it probable that the accused is guilty, but denied the truth out of fear, let him use other approved methods, always with due precautions, and by using the persuasions of the friends of the accused, do his utmost to extract the truth from his own lips. And let him not hasten the business, for very often meditation and the ordeal of imprisonment and the repeated persuasion of honest men will induce the accused to discover the truth. But if after keeping the accused in suspense, and after due and decent postponements of the time, and many exhortations of the accused, the bishop and the judge are well persuaded that, all circumstances considered, the accused is denying the truth, let them torture him slightly, without shedding blood, bearing in mind that the torture is often fallacious and ineffective, for some are so soft-hearted and feeble-minded that at the least torture they will confess anything, whether it be true or not. Others are so stubborn that, however much they are tortured, the truth is not to be had from them. There are others who, having been tortured before, are the better able to endure it a second time, since their arms have been accommodated to the stretchings and twistings involved, whereas the effect on the others is to make them weaker, so that they can the less easily endure the torture. Others are bewitched, and make use of the fact in their torture, so that they will die before they will confess anything, for they become, as it were, insensible to pain. Therefore, there is need for much prudence in the matter of torture, and the greatest attention is to be given to the condition of the person who is to be tortured. When, then, the sentence has been pronounced, the officers shall, without delay, prepare to torture the accused. And while they are making their preparations, the bishop or judge shall use his own persuasions, and those of other honest men, zealous for the faith, to induce the accused to confess the truth freely, if necessary, promising to spare his life, as we have shown above. But if the accused cannot thus be terrified into telling the truth, a second or third day may be appointed for the continuation of the torture. But it must not be repeated then and there, for such a repetition is not permissible unless some further indications against the accused should transpire. But there is nothing to prevent a continuation of the torture on another day. Let it be said, we, bishop and judge, if he is present, aforesaid assign to you such a day for the continuation of the torture, that the truth may be known from your own mouth. And let all be set down in the process, and during the interval appointed to him, let them use their own persuasions and those of other honest men to induce him to confess the truth. But if he has refused to confess, the torture can be continued on the day assigned, more or less severely according to the gravity of the offenses in question. And the judges will be able to observe many lawful precautions, both in word and deed, by which they may come at the truth, but they are more easily learned by use and experience in the variety of different cases than by the art of teaching of anyone. But if, after having been fittingly questioned and tortured, he will not discover the truth, let him not be further molested, but be freely allowed to depart. If, however, he confesses and abides by his confession, and uncovers the truth, acknowledging his guilt, and asking the pardon of the church, then according to the canon ad abolendum, he is to be treated as one taken in heresy on his own confession, but penitent. And he must abjure the heresy, and sentence must be pronounced against him, as in the case of those who are convicted by their own confession, as being taken in heresy. This will be explained in the 8th method of sentencing such, to which the reader may refer. If, on the other hand, he confesses the truth, but is not penitent, but obstinately persists in his heresy, but is not a relapsed heretic, then, according to the canon, after a decent interval and due warning, he is to be condemned as a heretic and handed over to the secular court to suffer the extreme penalty, as we show later in the 10th method. But if he is a relapsed heretic, he is to be condemned in the way which is again explained in the 10th method, to which the reader may refer. But here it must be particularly noted that in some instances he who is to be questioned confesses nothing against himself before the torture, nor is anything proved on the strength of which he can be required to abjure the heresy or be condemned as a heretic. And in such cases the above procedure should be adopted, as we have said, immediately. But in other cases the accused is taken in heresy, or he is to be considered either lightly or strongly suspected, and he is not to be tortured in respect of such matters. But if apart from these he denies such points which are not proved, but of which there is sufficient indication to warrant his being tortured, and if, having been questioned as to these under torture, he confesses to none of them, he is not on that account to be absolved in accordance with the first method, but he must be proceeded against according to that which has been proved against him, and he or she must abjure the heresy, as being one under suspicion of or taken in heresy, as the merits of the process may exact or require. And if, after torture, he confesses all or part of that for which he was tortured, then he must abjure both this and the former heresy, which was proved against him, and sentence must be pronounced against him in respect of both of these. Question 23. The 4th method of sentencing, in the case of one accused upon a light suspicion. The 4th method of concluding the process on behalf of the faith is used when, after the merits of the process have been diligently examined in consultation with expert lawyers, the accused is found to rest under only a light suspicion of heresy. And this is when the accused is not taken in heresy, nor is convicted by her own confession, or by the evidence of the facts, or by the legitimate production of witnesses, and there are no other strong or vehement indications of heresy against her, but only a small and light indications of such a sort as, in the opinion of the court, to engender a light suspicion against her, and such a one must be required to abjure the heresy of which she is accused. And then, if she relapses into heresy, she is not liable to the punishment of backsliders, although she must be more severely punished than would be the case if she had not previously abjured the heresy. See the canon C. Accusatus. The following procedure shall be followed in such a case. For such an accused, if the matter be a public one, will publicly make the following abjuration in the church. I, of such a diocese, a citizen of such a city or place, being on my trial, do swear before you, the Lord Bishop of such a city, and upon the holy Gospels placed before me, and upon which I set my hand, that I believe in my heart and profess with my lips that holy Catholic and apostolic faith, which the Holy Roman Church believes, confesses, preaches, and observes. Also I swear that I believe in my heart and profess with my lips that the Lord Jesus Christ, in company with all the saints, abominates the wicked heresy of witches, and that all who follow or adhere to it will with the devil and his angels be punished in eternal fire, unless they turn their hearts and are reconciled by the penitence of the Holy Church. And there I abjure, renounce, and revoke that heresy of which you, my Lord Bishop, and your officers hold me suspected, namely, that I have been familiar with witches, have ignorantly defended their errors, have held in detestation their inquisitors and prosecutors, or that I have failed to bring their crimes to light. Also I swear that I have never believed the aforesaid heresy, nor do I believe, nor have I adhered, nor do I adhere to it, nor shall I ever believe, adhere to, or teach it, nor do I intend to teach it. And if I should hereafter be guilty of any of the aforesaid practices, which God forbid, I shall willingly submit myself to the punishment provided by law for such who are so forsworn. And I am ready to undergo any penance which you see fit to enjoin me for those words or deeds of mine, for which you hold me deservedly suspect, and I swear to fulfill such penance to the best of my strength, and to admit no part of it, so help me God in these holy Gospels. The above abjuration shall be made in the common speech, so that all may understand it, and when it is done, the judge, if he is present, or his deputy, shall speak to her in common speech to the following effect. My son or daughter, you have not unworthily abjured the suspicion which we entertained of you, and have purged yourself by the aforesaid abjuration. Beware then, lest hereafter you fall into the heresy you have abjured. For although, if you should repent, you would not be delivered up to the secular court, since you made your abjuration as one under a light, and not a strong suspicion, yet you would then be far more severely punished than you would have been if you had not abjured, and you would then rest under a strong instead of a light suspicion. And when you should abjure as such, and afterwards should relapse, you would suffer the due punishment of a backslider, and would without mercy be delivered to the secular court to endure the extreme penalty. But if she makes her abjuration secretly in the chamber of the bishop or judge, which will be the case when the matter is not a public one, she shall abjure in the same manner, and afterwards sentence shall be pronounced as follows. We, by the mercy of God, bishop of such a city, or, if he is present, judge in the territory subject to such a prince, have carefully seen and examined the merits of the process conducted by us against you, accused before us heresy, find that you have committed such and such, naming them, which render you lightly suspected of heresy, on account of which we have judged it proper to cause you to abjure that heresy, as one lightly suspected of it. But not for that can you be dismissed unpunished. And that you may become more careful in the future, having consulted with many eminent persons, learned in the law, and with religious men, and having carefully weighed and digested the whole matter, having only God before our eyes, and the irrefragable truth of the holy Catholic faith, and with the holy Gospels placed before us, that our sentence may proceed as from God's countenance, and that our eyes may see with equity. And sitting in tribunal as judge, we condemn, sentence, or rather impose, penance upon you, standing in person here in our presence, in the following manner, namely, that never hereafter shall you knowingly hold to, associate with, defend in your speech, read, if you are well learned, or hereafter, etc., and let there be set down that which she has committed, on account of which she was held suspected of the crime of heresy. This sentence and penance were given, etc. All right. That's it for reading today. We'll do a slight pause, and then I'll be back and we'll play something. Don't go anywhere.